Rabbi, you need to unmute, please.
Sorry about that. Sometimes the spacebar just doesn't work. Usually when we think about the abortion debate, we think that it has two sides. On one side, we have evangelical Christians and Catholics who say that abortion is murder and must be outlawed. And then on the other side, the secular pro-choice people who say that people should have the choice about their bodies. In Judaism, certainly we believe in the sanctity of life. And in last week's Torah portion, when we read the Ten Commandments, we learned about the prohibition against murder. Lo tirtzach, don't murder. And this week, we learned the punishment that if one takes the life of another, that one's life will be taken. Capital punishment, nefesh tachat nefesh, life for life. But despite these clear prohibitions against murder, Judaism has a more nuanced and complex attitude towards abortion. And it starts in this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion, Mishpatim, as the cantor taught us earlier, which means laws, contains a whole host of laws, 53 in total. After we had the Big Ten from last week, the Ten Commandments, we have these 53 that the Israelites receive to help teach them how to behave as a people they are becoming. And we learn this in this week's Parsha. When two or more parties fight and one of them pushes a pregnant woman and a miscarriage results, but no other damage ensues, the one responsible shall be fined according as the woman's husband may exact, the payment to be based on reckoning. The penalty if a woman is pushed during a fight and her fetus miscarries is financial. There's no capital punishment that is exacted. What do we learn from this? Well, the rabbis see that there's a clear distinction here, that if the fetus was considered to be a person, then of course, if the woman miscarried, there would have to be nefesh tachat nefesh, life for life would have to be taken, as we learn in the next verse. But the fetus, according to Jewish tradition, does not have the status of personhood. As Moses Maimonides, the Rambam, asserts, if one assaults a woman even unintentionally and her child is born prematurely, he must pay the value of the child to the husband and the compensation for injury and pain to the woman. Monetary compensation, not life for life. In rabbinic tradition, the fetus is considered to be a part of the woman's body until it begins to emerge and have the possibility of living outside of the womb. Rashi, the great medieval commentator, states that as long as the child does not come out into the world, it is not called a living being. In other words, a nefesh. Once the head of the child has come out, the child may not be harmed because it is considered as fully born, and one life may not be taken to save another. But when the child begins to emerge, it becomes a life, a nefesh. In fact, the Talmud considers the embryo as mere water until it is 40 days in utero. And if the fetus might cause danger to the mother, that she might lose her life, the laws of pikuach nefesh, of our responsibility to save another life, require us, actually, to abort the fetus. A trigger warning here. The rabbis of the Mishnah and the Talmud, they never mince their words here. This is what the Mishnah teaches. If a woman is having difficulty in giving birth and her life is in danger, one cuts up the fetus within her womb and extracts it limb by limb because her life takes precedence over that of the fetus. But if the greater part is already born, one may not touch it, for one may not set aside one person's life for that of another. A distinction between when one becomes a life and one is still less than. So abortion is not just a matter of personal choice, not just something that secular people say, we want to have a choice of our own bodies, but it's also a religious freedom issue. In college, I had a pin that I would wear proudly to pro-choice rallies that said, U.S. out of my uterus. But now, as a rabbi, I tend to focus more on these religious imperatives and that seeing this as a religious freedom issue, and that there are other values that come into play that can allow someone to have an abortion. Laws granting fetal personhood and are asserting that life begins at conception violates the Establishment Clause by enshrining one's religious view into law. This violates pregnant individuals' rights to make their own decisions about their bodies, as well as collectively violating most Jews' right to practice Judaism, which permits and even sometimes requires terminating pregnancies if the life of the pregnant person is at stake. Additionally, abortion is a social justice issue. Those with means can find safe abortions. Those without will have trouble if they can find one at all. Some states have very few places to get a safe and legal abortion, but those with means can travel those distances in their own state or go to a different state. People who are denied access to reproductive health care are more likely to live in poverty and to remain in abusive relationships. Restricting abortion access disproportionately impacts those who are already marginalized in our society. People who are struggling financially, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, young people, those in rural communities, immigrants, people living with disabilities, and LGBTQ individuals. Abortion is safe, and it's safer when it's performed early, but it can be often hard for people in marginalized communities to have access to a safe abortion. The choice about whether or not to have an abortion is a matter for the pregnant person and whoever else they choose to consult. I also want to point here that I did not use the rabbis use the word, but I did not use the word woman here. And the reason I didn't use the word woman is that transgender men can also be pregnant. And so when we think of somebody being pregnant, it's not always someone who identifies as a woman. In Judaism, of course, we learn the preciousness of life. Judaism is not unfeeling or uncaring about a fetus, but it's not the equivalent of a human being outside of the womb. Of course, we want people to have healthy and successful pregnancies, and we want children to be born into the world. But we want those children who are born into the world to be children who the person who is carrying that child wants that child. A pregnant person may choose to get an abortion for a whole host of reasons. Perhaps there's been a fetal abnormality. Someone's been a victim of rape, health considerations, or not prepared to be a parent. There are over 450 state laws restricting access to reproductive health care that have been passed since 2011, in the last 10 years. And these laws are ranging from abortion bans to biased counseling mandates to medically unnecessary regulations imposing onerous requirements on providers and patients. Access to abortion is already hanging by a thread for many people across the country, particularly for marginalized communities. It is incumbent upon us to protect access to safe abortions, but also to reproductive health care in general. Lack of access to birth control, prenatal health care, and access to resources to feed, house, clothe, and take care of a child are other reasons that one may choose to get an abortion. Mishpatim, this week's Torah portion. In it, we learn the laws we need to guide us as we leave Egypt and have to take a responsibility to be a free people. Jewish tradition is clear about the importance of our prioritizing the well-being of pregnant people throughout their pregnancy and to make sure that all babies, once they are born, have access to proper nutrition, housing, and other necessities to help them thrive. Access to abortion is only one part of this picture here, but that Mishpatim teaches us about the importance of the respect and care and justice that all human beings deserve. May this be what we learn from our tradition, and may we uphold it in ways that bring justice and fairness and compassion to all human beings. Amen.